Well, welcome everyone to today's Pipeline Report. We have a lot to get into as we have a lot of exciting things, even in this month of rest at the Senate is taking. But Iran and the United States are continuing to talk as the 60-day ceasefire has come to an end and the MOU is still undetermined. And Israel and Gaza have come to roadblock in dealing with the peace deal with that. And then we have 3 primaries today that we want to talk to and talk about how we can pray into those things today. So stay along with us today on today's Pipeline Report, and we'll dive into this and much more. All right, welcome everyone back from a great weekend. Hopefully you guys had. Zach Carscaden here, flying solo as Pastor Jim continues his speaking tour in Germany and Europe. And today there's a lot to get into as President Trump continues to negotiate during this month of August and leading up to primaries. We have 3 major primaries we want to dive into today. But first, we want to start with some of the most contentious points for this administration at this point, which are the negotiations between Israel and Gaza and involving Egypt. And then I want to dive into the Iran peace deal and talks there. So give me 1 second as I get my camera back up and running. Again, apologies for the delay as I'm flying solo here today. So let's go ahead and dive into the Israel issue here that we're discussing with Jared Kushner and Egypt. There is obviously some contention points there because if you remember from last week when we talked about this issue, Netanyahu and Israel are not on board with this plan. And so you have 2 parties who are in agreement who want to go forward with a big plan, but in reality, the major one, which is Israel, who is, the ones being attacked from October 7th, they're saying, hey, we have a say in this. And so Netanyahu has something to say, but here's a report from NBC News that talks about this in the discussions with Jared Kushner and on this deal with Netanyahu.
We know that Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of the president, met with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today after he had talks with the leaders of Hamas. What are we learning about how these two meetings went?
That's right. So this was a pretty consequential meeting, particularly because it came a day after Jared Kushner met with Khalil el-Hayya, the newly elected leader of Hamas. That could be unprecedented in terms of seeing top-level Americans meeting top-level Hamas officials. Hamas, of course, is a designated terror group by the United States.
So the big contention point that Kushner's trying to push for is a no redeployment or reconstruction in the Gaza Strip before Hamas is disarmed. That's what Israel wants. And then the first step towards demilitarization of the Strip, which would require Hamas to hand over its weapons. Hamas has said they will not do that, so they're at a standstill, and then ultimately take necessary measures to address sanitation and environmental concerns. It's a war zone. And there's a report from the Jerusalem Post that talks about how Israel wants to see Hamas hand over its weapons to ISF, who will make sure that they don't go to the Gazan government and or the Palestinians. So there's a major conflict there. ISF stands for International Stabilization Force, which would basically be the EU more than likely. And in reality, the question is well, would those then get back into the hands of the Palestinians? Who knows? Because here you have the U.S. being involved in that. So saying that they will oversee the weapons transfer. And the decision for Netanyahu, as he's coming up across an internal election within, I'm trying to see if it has it here on this. Yeah. They're having Netanyahu faces tests of party control of Likud primaries, where as of right now, earlier this morning, it was 26% turnout. It's up to 43%. So they're having internal votes on who should lead the party in the Likud within Israel. So Israel's going through a lot right now in regards to this. But then you have the report that was mentioned where it talks about Kushner meeting with Egypt. So before Kushner met with Israel or met with President Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, he met with Hamas leaders and Egyptians to discuss, how they want to proceed. And this is the report from CBS News.
Correspondent Remy Inocencio. He's in our London bureau and has more on Jared Kushner's meeting with Hamas. Remy, good morning. How did this meeting happen exactly, and what comes next?
Sure, Errol. Good to see you again. Well, according to a source with knowledge of that meeting to CBS News, this is the White House's push to keep this Gaza peace plan moving along, and despite Netanyahu's no from last week. Now, notable that after Netanyahu said no, he wanted to reject it, we get this confirmation that Kushner's now met with Hamas and its chief negotiator, Khalil al-Hayya, along with members from Egypt, from Turkey, and Qatar, these mediators there. A reminder, though, and crucially, the Gaza peace plan would require Hamas to totally disarm and then for Israel to withdraw from the estimated 60% or so of the strip that it operates in. This is the second phase of the plan, the demilitarization after that initial ceasefire from late last year. But from Israel, there is a lot of doubt that there could ever be true total disarmament of Hamas. And Netanyahu said that Israel won't withdraw until Hamas genuinely, his word there, disarmed. So for what comes next, your second question, we'll see if Kushner does meet Netanyahu. That is apparently on track for now. And if he changes his mind, potentially. But he also has a domestic lens to look through, Errol, because Netanyahu is facing a tough election later this October. He needs the support of right-wing parties. This is one of the most far-right governments that Israel has had. And those right-wing parties, have already rejected Trump's Gaza peace plan.
So you have that at play. So Netanyahu not only has international pressure, but he also has internal pressure within Israel. And what the Israelis are saying is, hey, we want to protect our country. We can no longer afford to play in the hypothetical world of whether they won't attack us or will. And there's a lot of Israelis calling for Israel to continue to maintain control of the Strip moving forward and be a part with the United States of the reconstruction there, with Israel still militarily in control. Again, that's up for debate because you have Arab countries and then Gaza and the Palestinians wanting to say, hey, well, we want to be the ones to come in. But the question is, who do you allow to come in, et cetera? So this kind of crazy cycle continues to go on. And the reality is the plan Trump has put forward is a non-starter, and Israel's holding its ground. And I think the Israeli people have a concern and a right to kind of stand there. Now, moving forward onto the Iran negotiations, as the 60-day ceasefire has come to a close, is the fact that there's now concerns moving forward with what to do and why things actually took so long. So there's a good report from CBN News I want to play here that talks about this, where it kind of gives an interesting perspective, because we're seeing the narrative. And you remember the reports came out of the New York Post. We briefly mentioned them here, where there was a rumor that, supplies and munitions were low in the region and there needed to be a stockpile. That seems to be coming out, and the Trump administration can't really debunk that, because, hey, they've been using their munitions for quite some time, and now the reality is there needs to be some restocking. So here's CBN talking about this.
Running out as the 60-day ceasefire agreed to in the Memorandum of Understanding between the U.S. and Iran expires, with no talks underway to extend it. The Wall Street Journal reports that both Iran and the U.S. are using the pause to buy time for larger attacks. The threat comes as rhetoric is increasing from Tehran. The Iranian military chief is reportedly offering a $30,000 reward for any American soldier killed or captured, double that amount if it's carried out by an Iranian woman. The threat comes as President Trump says the U.S. is increasingly in control of the Strait of Hormuz.
So you're seeing that, and Trump came out and said this.
After we finish defeating Iran, which is being very badly defeated, pretty soon I'll be declaring the Hormuz Strait a territory of the United States. Essentially, that's what it is. We have the blockade. No ships get through unless we want them to.
Trump added that the oil prices driven up by the...
So we're seeing now this weekend that Trump talks about, or more so this morning, he says he's threatening Oman over potential interference as they're involved with the negotiations. We talked about this last week. Is Oman's now involved in the negotiations? Do they then try to strong-arm the United States into doing some deal that is in favor of them? There's a great report coming out from Fox News this morning that talks about how involved Oman is and what it looks like for Oman being involved. And the reality is look, this is all about the Strait of Hormuz. This has kind of been the contention point. And the reality for Iran and Oman is that if they keep this pressure up, Saudi and everybody else is going to find other ways to get the oil out from going through the Strait of Hormuz and finding other ways, which is what they've already started to do, and investing billions of dollars of putting pipeline in to just avoid the Strait of Hormuz altogether.
It marks the end of a 60-day window to reach a broader ceasefire. It expires with both sides still dug in on the Strait of Hormuz. Meanwhile, Iran reportedly says it is shifting its stance from defense to offense. What does that mean? Well, General Jack Keane on that last hour.
When you hear phrases like this, we're going on offense, one, that's a threat, and a lot of their threats are hollow. But I do think there is some substance to it. They miscalculate time and time again in not understanding who our president is. If they push in that direction, I suspect the president will come down very, very strong on them once and for all.
Alexandria Hoff has more from the White House. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning, Dana. Yeah, the 60-day truce officially expires today, but in reality, it had sunk long before the clock ran out due to continued friction over the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, let's not forget that the bombings and things have continued to take place. So this is really not something that's ever ceased. The interesting point for the United States is that there is a significant morale shakeup on one of the aircraft carriers in the region, the USS Lincoln. And here's a report that talks about this from ABC News yesterday, from this week.
Staff Admiral Mike Mullen, good to see you, Admiral Mullen. Just your reaction to what you've seen and the deployment 200 days without a port call.
Well, it's significant and it's tough. Those deployments are very, very difficult. Historically, we've been able to typically go to a port to take a break, do maintenance, and then come back online. Even back in Vietnam timeframe, we did that. The problem right now is in the AOR, the places we would do that, Bahrain, in the theater, Bahrain, or in the United Arab Emirates, those are targeted right now. In fact, we've, because of that, established a base down in Diego Garcia. But even Diego Garcia, the Iranians have taken a shot at. So the security and the safety and security, obviously these assets is hugely concerning. So there just isn't an easy place to go in terms of a port visit.
And if you're not aware, what's happened is there's about 24 or so sailors who have had some mental lapses and some suicides that have been involved. And you're talking about, I think, upwards of 5,000 sailors altogether. And so it's 24 in a group of about 5,000 that are having these issues. And that's hard. 9 months now, possibly going longer. They're trying to find a resolution. The issue at play here is, from the military side, they say they only have 11 aircraft carriers and they need 15. And it's going to take too long to get 15 up and running. But this comes off the heels of a president and then going back to even the Obama administration, where they kind of pulled back on defense spending and let these things lapse. And so we're kind of paying the price for it now, as we're seeing in the energy sector. So we're seeing these things play out. If you need something to pray for this, pray for these men, families involved in this, not hearing from them possibly in these regions where they're out at sea, and that's difficult to handle. The military side is like, look, there have been longer deployments, so these guys kind of need to suck it up a little bit. But the reality is look, 9 months at sea for some people is kind of hard, especially on a ship. Some people might be claustrophobic, et cetera, and it's nothing to make light of. But the reality is that's kind of what they're dealing with here, involved with the possibility of staying longer and increased attacks as things start to heat up. So bring those things up, major prayer points, especially as you're seeing this as well, where the Democratic lawmakers are demanding answers from Pete Hegseth, rightfully so, on the USS Abraham Lincoln and the people on board. And it's something that needs to be paid attention to for this administration, and something we'll be praying into moving forward. Okay. The last big thing I want to get into, we've been talking about, if you've been paying attention to podcasts today, this morning from Pastor Tim, talking about we're in the month of Elul, and it's the month of the king is in the field, talking about 2 Corinthians 19:4, where the king at the time, if Jehoshaphat was going out into the field to be around the people, and this was a time historically, yearly, that whoever was king would, rather than sit in their temple and sit in their castle and sit on their throne, would go out and be amongst the people. So you wouldn't have to come, give an appointment, understand protocol, but he would go out into the people, into the fields, and the people could come meet with him. And spiritually, what that speaks of is it's a time for us to be able to spend that time with the Lord. This is a time to reshape, as you've heard this morning if you watched that. But I think most importantly, as this leads into the feast leading into the end of the year, this is the month of repentance, the month of mercy, and also you could say that is the month of forgiveness, where you're seeking you're seeking forgiveness from the Lord, which is why you're walking into the Feast of Atonement and things of that nature. And the reality is it's a time to realign ourselves. And it's funny because we didn't necessarily plan it this way, but that's what Pastor Tim talks about here at the ministry, is that's what we're doing, resetting our core values and really reiterating them, not necessarily thinking that we walked away from them. It's just, sometimes you need to be reminded of things. And this is that time of the year to do that. And for a king to be out in the field and to be with the people, it'd be a great reminder of, these are the people, this is why I'm serving, this is, who we're making certain decisions for. And you're seeing that with our leaders right now, taking a break from D.C., going back, campaigning, doing town halls, talking with their constituents, learning and getting in amongst the people. So It's interesting that those things fall that way. But today is the day where there are 3 primaries. And we'll lay out some dates here where we see the future ones here. So today is Florida, Alaska, and Wyoming. And then 3 more on the books. September 1st is Massachusetts. If you saw what happened last week, they need some major reforms within their government, and more so the people there need to rise up. Then on September 8th, you have New Hampshire and Rhode Island. Excuse me. Now, with Florida, let me bring this up, is you have a gubernatorial election, and then you have Senate and House seats. DeSantis's tenure has run out, so there is going to be a new governor within Florida. Talks of Brian Danielson, if I remember his name correctly, running there. So this is the month to prepare for the October elections. And I wanted to bring up from Releasing the Prophetic Destiny of a Nation, Chuck Pierce and Dutch Sheets and Tim Sheets go through, and they did their 50-state tour. Well, they talk about each nation, and they talk about the prophetic word and the prophetic destiny, the redemptive gifts for each state. And it's really interesting to see where these things line out for where these states need to be. And something interesting that's happening is you've seen some of this play out, but you're also looking at this battle where there's things that are still at play, to say the least. And so for Florida, we'll start there, seeing that we're talking about them. The biggest thing, it'll be a state of transformation, and what the principles of what they're saying it includes is it must change the atmosphere over your territory. And Florida right now is a major battleground state and has been for quite some time, even going back to George W. and the Gore election. And so there's something there. There's a battle there, and having lived this experience is, you have basically 2 different states, 3 really within the state, because you have North Florida, which is basically like South Georgia, Alabama, and then you have South Florida, which is like the Northeast, and then you have, if you go further down, Miami, Key Biscayne, Key West, it's Hispanic. And so you have 3 different dynamics that are going on there that are really up for grabs, to say the least. And then they talk about the suddenlies that will occur in 2003, and then know how to take or be overtaken. And in this instance, there's a major battle where, if we remember back to before DeSantis won, there was Andrew Gillum, who was up and the leading candidate on the Democratic Party. He was their knight in shining armor, and then last week or so he gets rearrested again on possession of drug charges. So Florida could have gone either way, and they chose. We chose at the time. I say because I voted in those elections. They voted properly, and they were able to really save their state, because that would have been a road horrible to go down. So there's a lot of potential battles there that could be avoided. And then we go to Alaska. Alaska is a state where they have basically open primaries. They have, if we look here, they have primaries in the U.S. Senate, U.S. House, governor, and state legislature, and then down ballot issues as well. I'll bring this up here so you guys can see it. And so there's things could go either way. Now, with Alaska, their prophetic destiny that they released is they're talking about how Alaska is the gateway of the nations to the Ancient of Days. It is ultimately, Chuck says, Alaska is my Alpha and Omega state from the Lord. Ultimately, the cry that God says is, tell my people to move forward and not back into yesterday. And there's potential of that as they somewhat do these open primaries. But in reality, there's a problem they have where they have, you can see it here, they have 2 Republican candidates for the Senate that have the same name. If I remember correctly, it's Dan S. And their middle name is different, and Daniel Sullivan. So you have two people, you have a major problem there because people could get confused. Oh, Republican Dan Sullivan? They're going to have an issue with that and possibly bring out some confusion. You also have the governor's race coming forward, open primary there, the House. So you see these things, and the challenge for them is to not go backwards. And then moving on to the last one here is Wyoming. And I know we have a few people who faithfully watched us for quite some time from Wyoming. And what they have moving forward is elections dealing with the U.S. Senate, the governor's race, and then also Secretary of State and the U.S. House. So major elections there that are going to be coming forward. And then you have state Senate as well. So depending on what district you guys are in and the state House, these are major elections to primaries to vote on today. And the big prophetic cry that they had here was ultimately that Chuck felt like the Lord was saying, he says, I need for the people, my people in Wyoming, to know that they have a loud voice in the Spirit, that they have significance. And I know Wyoming is not the most densely populated state, but in reality, it's a state of deliverance where there's a lot of spiritual, political, just natural leaders who go there for a time of refreshing. They try to break away from the norms of the hustle and bustle of, a city. And then Chuck goes on to say, and he says, you have a great voice in the Spirit, and when you pray, when you decree things, you have as much as a voice as any place else in the nation. And so for those of you in Wyoming, know that, okay, there's may not be many of you, but your voice carries weight in the Spirit. And it's something right now that as you see things, to declare things of what the Lord is saying for this nation, as not only religious, but natural and political leaders come there for refreshing. There's tons of retreat centers and places there for people to get refreshed and renewed in this season. And as we're kind of in that place of restoration and realignment, we're seeing the possibility of, these retreats take place. What a better way if, you work in those areas to kind of deal with this in the spirit realm, where you can kind of carry some weight and help bring clarity to those who come. And I know that seems kind of far-fetched. Oh, how can we do that? But the reality is like prophets of old and New Testament is, they heard the Lord and they prayed and they acted accordingly. And it's a time to put action to faith in this month where, okay, Lord, how do we cleanse things? How do we do things? When we talk about the need for a Sabbath and need for rest, the American mind tends to go to, let's do nothing. Let's just sit around and vegetate. Well, the reality is if you study in Genesis 2, where the Lord talks about the Sabbath, it's a creative rest. It's an active rest. It's a reminding ourselves of what the Lord has done in us, through us, but then also how he's given us the ability to create. Deuteronomy 8:18, he gives us the power to create wealth. And so we're seeing this as a time, as we're going through the month of repentance, going through the month of forgiveness, to remember what the Lord has done in us and through us, and then ask ourselves, is this where we need to be moving forward? And a great time for that is through these primaries, because if we're not realigned moving into October and November for the midterms, if we ourselves aren't in alignment, in praying and interceding for those who are running for elections, staying on the path of freedom, to say the least, then we can lose ground here. And so what we want to focus on and continue to is these primaries that are coming up, not too many left, but I wanted to run through those prophetic words for the nations and for those states that we are seeing have primaries today and moving forward. Not a lot left, but as we get through this primary season, we'll have the round out of who will be on the ballots come November, and then how things will play out moving forward, as there have been some wins, there have been some losses, as far as those who want to stand for freedom. And there's been a reality check on both the Republican and Democratic Party to see where their constituents lie, and then more so where their parties lie. And there's been some shifting going on. So we'll continue to pay attention to that as we move forward, as we continue to stand on the wall praying for our nation, the office of the president, and the decisions that lie before them, not only affecting the United States, but our allies here and far, Israel, and you also see in South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan as well, coming into play now with some possibility of increased pressure there from China. So blessings to each and every one of you. Follow along, and let's remember God's call for each state, and then for ourselves as we realign in this month. So I'll see you guys next week. Have a good one.